Um, I think it's important that that we have a nuanced view of the idea of karma. Go grab Recta for me, real quickly. I think everybody here in this small gathering understands karma as what goes around comes around. We're talking about karma for a minute. I think everybody here understands that. I'm going to call that a boilerplate understanding. You guys know what a boilerplate understanding is? It's like the lowest level default position that's just automatic. It's boilerplate. There's nothing extra added. No extras. So, a boilerplate understanding is that karma is what you do then comes back to you. And I think that, although that's a very, very simplistic understanding, I think it's good. I think it's a good first level child's understanding of karma. And I think there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that understanding of karma. So we'll call that a boilerplate, introductory, but introductory in the sense that there's nothing wrong with that understanding. It's good basic arithmetic. Now we gotta get into it a little bit. And one of the ways you get into it is you think, what reason is there to believe in karma? And we'll call karma a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a testable explanation for something. And you have to be able to test it. And then if you test a hypothesis and it works, then it becomes a theory. And at some point, when you test it and it works, and you've tested it completely rigorously, and there's no way it couldn't be true, then it becomes a point of fact. So you have different potential explanations, and if one makes good sense and it's reasonable, it gets called a hypothesis. And if a hypothesis is subjectable to testing, and it passes those tests, then it becomes a theory. And if the evidence for that theory becomes indisputable, and it's just, in every circumstance it's proven true, then that theory becomes accepted as a fact. You could almost say a fact is the point at which people's curiosity ceases to exist. It's been so evidenced, it's been so tested, that now you just call it a point of fact. Now the default is that's a fact, and if you want to disprove it, you now have to give evidence, because so much evidence, like for instance, I'll give you a simple example. All men are mortal. Men here being mankind. All people are mortal. That's so attested to in every circumstance that if you want to say there's someone who's immortal, okay, have at it, but the burden of proof is on you. You follow this? So we're going to call what goes around, comes around, a hypothesis. And the reason is because it extrapolates on principles like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It builds on these observable facts of nature. I think the anecdotal evidence that you cut somebody off and then somebody cuts you off, I think the anecdotal evidence is not very persuasive. And there's a reason why I find the anecdotal evidence unpersuasive. The reason is because someone can say, actually, I have the opposite experience. And if another person can take your anecdotal evidence and just reverse it on you, then how good is it? You have a psychological need to believe in God. That's why religion exists, because of a psychological need to believe in God. Well, I also have a need to breathe. And I have a need for love and affection. And I have all sorts of psychological needs. Children need touch, for instance, and love, and you need attachment figures and all sorts of things. The fact that those are psychological needs or physical needs doesn't support the idea that those things don't exist. In fact, it supports the idea that those things exist, and therefore we have evolved to have a need for those things because those things actually exist. Did you follow that? So just because you have a psychological need for something isn't even good evidence that it's not true. It could actually be seen as evidence that's more likely to be true. Did you guys follow this? You didn't follow this, Fernanda. It was a little fast. My English was a little fast. Did you guys all follow that? If I have a psychological need to breathe or a physical need to breathe, does that make it less likely that oxygen exists? No, it makes it more likely. That's why I have the need. If I have a psychological need for attachment figures and love, does that indicate that those things don't actually exist? No, it indicates those things exist, and therefore I'm hardwired to believe in them. So the need for something doesn't indicate it doesn't exist, and it's simply delusional. If you have a need for something, it's actually good evidence that most probably that thing exists. Therefore, if you have a psychological need to believe in God, that actually counts as some low-level evidence that maybe it's more reasonable. Maybe that skews the deck in God's favor. Did you follow that? That's an instance of logical thinking and reasonable thinking and not playing into people's assumptions. When people talk to you, they make assumed premises. They assume things in the conversation. They don't bother explaining to you why they assume them. They just assume them and they construct a logic based on those assumptions. When you're debating with somebody, one of the primary things you need to do is spot the unstated premise and question it. It's an unstated premise that a psychological need makes it less likely to exist, but actually that the opposite is true. It makes it more likely to exist. Therefore, you have to learn to question the premises, the unstated premises especially, of the person you're engaging with, because those unstated premises usually reveal their flawed thinking. Normally, people are logic. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, there you go. Most people can construct a logical syllogism automatically. We're built to think logically. We're built to reason. Our prefrontal cortex is built to reason. We're made to think reasonably and not just operate off of instinct. Sometimes we operate off of base instinct and then construct a philosophy to justify our base instincts. But we can also look at things dispassionately and think about things critically, and we can question our unstated premises and our instincts and live a very, very progressive life. Our power of thought, our power of reasoning is remarkable. It's the defining feature of human beings. Instead of inventing philosophies to justify our instincts and impulses, we can instead look at things logically and reasonably and critically and question our own unstated premises and predilections and base instincts and not be forced to simply obey them like an animal. Our massive multi-layered prefrontal cortex makes that kind of decision-making, abstraction possible on a level that no other animal touches. The smartest animals in the world are like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. In their best ways. So, we see in the world that what goes around comes around in terms of actions have equal and opposite reactions, and then we extrapolate from that physical principle and we consider that that's also true morally. The anecdotal evidence is not good because it can just be reversed on you. Somebody can say, actually, I found that there is no karma. And murderers get away with murder and never suffer for it. And then you say, well, they're suffering in the next life. And they say, I don't believe in the next life. And now you've lost the argument because you're the way it's like if you make the wrong moves in chess and then you're defeated. You make the wrong move and they make and then you might have a few moves left, but you're being defeated. If you get to a point where you have to go, in your next life you'll suffer, and then they go, I don't believe in the next life, and you're like, now we're going to debate reincarnation, you lost the argument. Perhaps you shouldn't have had the argument about karma at all. You should have just had an argument about reincarnation and refuse to talk about karma, because if karma for you is based on reincarnation, then you need to argue for reincarnation first before you argue for karma. Otherwise, you fail the karma argument every time and have to go to reincarnation. You get it? So you have to spot this stuff, and you don't want to make arguments that quickly lead you to that neutral position where you can't advance a proposition and the opposite is just as likely to be true as yours, or you have to have a totally different debate. You guys following this? Okay. I prefer to argue for karma, not from extrapolating from every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And definitely not anecdotally. I'll throw in that little physics. I'll sprinkle it in there. Just kind of put it in there. A dash of salt, something. Throw it in there. It's not going to hurt. It's like you get some fresh herbs in your garden, you throw them in your soup. It's not going to make your soup, but it's certainly not going to hurt. But the rice and beans of this stew, I want to focus on the rice and beans. And so, for me, the rice and beans of the stew is I don't argue for karma. Rather, I argue for the existence of God. Then I argue for the existence of an all-good, all-powerful God. And once I win the discussion and even just get to a place where God is more likely than not, and God is a reasonable hypothesis and even a good theory, and that there's good evidence. What's the good evidence for believing in God? Consciousness. Why? Because it gets you to a soul, and a soul gets you to a source of all souls, and that gets you to a God. And you got to argue for God being all powerful. Well, if God created the world and is the source of everything, then God's all powerful, being the source of everything. So that's good. And you got to get to all good. Well, if all good is power, because you define goodness as if you define evil and good as choices, like you can just choose evil or you can choose good, then why does God choose good versus evil? It's a harder argument to make. But that's another unstated premise, that we think of evil and good as just being two choices. You just choose this one, or you go left or you go right. I want to argue that goodness is the default position. That people will naturally do the right thing unless their weakness of character prohibits them from doing the right thing. Their lust, their anger, their greed, their inability to accomplish their desires in a way which is beneficial for other people, their need to exploit other people for their own satisfaction. I view evil as weakness, as a character defect. If God's all-powerful, he has no character defects. He can accomplish all of his desires in a way which is beneficial for the world. Therefore, God would never have to choose evil. Evil is chosen because you're too weak to do the right thing. And when all things are equal, you'll do the right thing. It's only when there's a reason why you can't do the right thing. But an omnipotent being would never have a reason why they couldn't do the right thing. And therefore, God being omnipotent means God's also all-knowing, because knowledge is power, and he's also good, because goodness is, in this instance, in this argument, goodness is an aspect of power. Did you guys follow that? That's a good argument. It's Richard Swinburne's argument. He's a big theologian, Oxford or Cambridge. Big guy, huge philosopher. And he makes that argument, and I find that argument to be compelling. You can argue it. You can go against it. It's not like the tennis match is over, but it's a good, solid serve. Another one is the karma of being... So one argument is, one route for me proving karma is there's consciousness. That means there's a source of consciousness. That means the source of the universe is also a source of consciousness. There's a source of the universe because the universe is expanding from a central point. We can prove that through astrophysics. Right?
Yes.
And so it means that the Big Bang is reasonable because the universe is expanding. So now the expansion comes from a singularity, and now that singularity must possess consciousness because we've arrived at the idea that consciousness is a properly basic fundamental feature of reality. Therefore, the Big Bang, the singularity, must possess consciousness. And then everything comes from that conscious singularity. And what's a conscious singularity?
God.
There you go. And that conscious singularity is the source of everything. It's all-powerful. And all-powerful means all-knowing. And all-powerful, based on the argument I just made, also means all-good. And once you have an all-good, all-powerful God, there must be a law of karma. And now you can get poetic. And you can start to now make arguments like, God loves us so much because he's all good, so of course he loves us. And he gives us free will that we can choose what we want to do, because an all-good God would give us free will, because free will allows for beautiful things like love to exist, even though it means the possibility of evil is there if we choose the wrong thing. And so the best of all possible worlds would be a world with the possibility of us choosing wrong, ergo evil, but it would also be a world with the possibility of love. And to create the best of all possible worlds, which would be a world with the possibility of love, God gives us free will and gives up his own omnipotence, because now we actually have power, and God is omnipotent, save and except for he doesn't get in the way of our free will. But he has a law of karma so that you are left to do your own thing and get an opposite reaction to what you do. And he sets up the universe with this tacit law of cause and effect. Why? Because it is a good teacher, but it's not a forceful teacher. It teaches you if you want to let it, but doesn't demand that you learn. And therefore, an all-good, all-powerful deity walking the razor's edge of giving you the best shot at turning back towards him without forcing your hand would create the law of karma, which is what you get to do. And then that also regulates so you can't take advantage of other people. And it creates a fair playing field, so everything goes around and comes around, but it never actually touches you because your soul is pure forever and you get covered over by illusion, but you don't actually get infected with it. And that's why it all washes off through things like bhakti, through things like turning towards divinity. Now, a world that's like a dream, where we dream, but it's a fair world. We can't take advantage of other people. And we're given our just desserts, which tends to teach us and help us to improve over time, but doesn't force us to, therefore it doesn't compromise our free will, but it's really God riding shotgun in our life and helping us out. See how beautiful the idea of karma now becomes? Way more than just the idea that what comes around goes around. And now it's a much more deep idea, which is linked in many ways to our theology, to bhakti, to God's love for us, to our freedom. And that rich, poetic, persuasive understanding of karma stands on the solid foundation of there being an all-good and all-powerful deity. And once you get to that, karma makes perfect sense. And you can really start to nuance your understanding and see how many beautiful things attach. I have another argument for karma. This is another strong foundation. It's an atheistic one. So I gave a theistic one. I have an atheistic one. If you are a jerk, you will be miserable. Positive psychology has learned this. Selfish, narcissistic people are less happy than selfless, forgiving, grateful people. All the good qualities that you learn when you become a Boy Scout, to be truthful, helpful, friendly. I can't. Hold on, say it again.
Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, good keeper, clean.
There you go. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, clean, thrifty, right? Cheerful. Yeah, I remember most of it. I wasn't an Eagle Scout, so I don't remember all of it. But yeah, I remember most of it. So, trustful, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, clean, kind, obedient, thrifty, reverent. I missed a couple, right? Courageous, yeah, it's a good one to remember. Courageous. So it's cool. They have some, it's a marriage of opposites. You got to be obedient and courageous, right? It's a good list, actually. Those scout-like qualities make people happier. When you are a narcissistic jerk, you become less happy. And so karma is written into the structure of our psychology. That the happiest, most successful people who have the most wonderful, fulfilling lives embody these amazing selfless qualities. And if you don't, you are tortured by the jail you make from your poor cognition and your poor behavior. That's a sexy argument for karma. You know why it's so sexy? Why is it sexy, Ross?
Everyone can relate to it. It's very simple.
It doesn't depend on believing in God. I can just make the argument right now. I can point to evidence from positive psychology. And it's just, there you go. It's its own reward. Being a good person is its own reward. You feel better about yourself. You sleep better. Those two arguments together, I think, are a very solid foundation. The irreducibility of consciousness to the singularity that's conscious, to God, to an omnipotent God, to an omnibenevolent God. Right? Another way to get to omnibenevolence is that we look at human beings who are the closest to God in their ability to think and conceive and love and have a very incredible power of thought and closer to omniscience. And therefore, if we look at human society, you will find that we are most divine-like because we're the closest to God in creation. Now you have an all-powerful deity that created the world, but we, being the apex, we are now most God-like or most divine-like. And when we look at what brings human beings together, makes human beings happy, it are these wonderful qualities. And therefore, those wonderful qualities must be part of God's nature, because by looking at the result, you can understand something about the source. By looking at a child, you can understand something about what their parents look like. So by looking at human beings as the most important children of God, because they have the most evolved ability to understand God, and therefore the closest to divinity, we can then look for what makes human beings thrive. And in fact, the first argument is what makes us thrive are these good qualities, and therefore those good qualities must be part of God's nature. And that's another way to get to God being all good. And that way piggybacks on the other argument, which was atheistic. Did you guys follow that? Did you guys follow that? That was really sharp. That was brilliant. I've never thought of that before. I'm excited right now. You guys didn't follow it. I'm going to say it again. Try to follow it. Argument one, consciousness to a conscious singularity, to an all-powerful deity. And now we got to get to an all-good deity. One way of getting to an all-good deity is to see that being all-powerful means you're all good, because the only thing stopping you from being all good is if some weakness. If you don't have any weakness, you'll always be able to accomplish things in the proper way, and therefore goodness is an aspect of power, and therefore an all-powerful being would be all good. Just like an all-powerful being would be all-intelligent, because intelligence is also a power. And goodness isn't a choice left or right. Goodness is actually a default position unless there was weakness that required you to be bad. And because God has no weakness, he can therefore always be good. Now I have another argument. And then that all-good, all-powerful God would create a beautiful world with karma, and I gave a whole nice explanation of all the different threads and how karma is just part of a very, very rich worldview of God's love for us, of our free will, of our ability to love God, of our necessity of learning lessons, of God riding shotgun with us, of him not compromising our free will, of him compromising omnipotence, of what would be the best of all possible worlds, and so on and so forth. And of course, reincarnation also just fits right in there. He would give us unlimited opportunities. And well, why can't we remember them all? Because that would take away our free will. If you remember too much, you wouldn't have free will. So you have to forget. And that reincarnation becomes a natural result of an all-good, all-powerful deity and the best of all possible worlds, which an all-good, all-powerful God would create the best of all possible worlds, and all-good God would want to, and all-powerful God could. But now there's another way to argue for karma, and that is that you torture yourself and you're miserable. That's your karma for being a jerk. And we can prove through positive psychology and a ton of happiness experiments which have been done, that forgiveness and gratitude and integrity and things like this make people happy. And everybody knows this. Nobody wants to admit it. Everyone wants to try and cheat the system. Just like a drug addict thinks, I'll just take heroin one more time and then I'll give it up. I'll just smoke crack cocaine one more time and then I'll give it up. When I was doing cocaine when I was younger, I remember I would always think, I'll just do it one more time. Then I'll give it up. I had that thought. Every drug addict worth their salt has had that idea. It's just preposterous. It's not how it works. You follow? And so we want to think, oh, I'll just be a jerk and I'll become happy, but it doesn't actually work like that. And most people know that. And that's there's evidence, there's hard evidence, and the anecdotal evidence squares with the hard evidence, and so you have a really powerful argument that has nothing whatsoever to do with God. It's just karma as a pre-theistic principle of reality that has nothing whatsoever to do with God. And I can argue for it right here, right now, based on stuff I can point to right now and your own life. And I can make a strong, persuasive case for karma. Doesn't get me to God, but I can make a strong, persuasive case. And that immediate, strong, persuasive case, based on just looking right in front of your face, coupled with an exploration of the nature of reality that gets you to an all-good, all-powerful deity, those are two solid foundations to base now the theory of karma on. Now it's not a hypothesis. Now it starts to square up enough with things where now it starts to sound like a theory that we just invite you to work with and try out and see what happens. And that's super cool. We don't demand you accept it blindly and wear a cross and get baptized. We just say, hey, it's a cool theory. Why don't we play with it? It's a good enough theory that we should experiment with it. It's when you're in Australia and you're in the bush in Australia, in the outback in Australia, which I've been in, and you're sleeping, and then a wallaby comes around, which are like these kind of half kangaroo type deals, and so a wallaby rocks up. The wallabies walk on 2 feet like a human being, so you'll hear somebody walking up to your which that sounded a lot like a human being's footprints, and you freak out because it sounds like there's a dude with a machete who's creeping up on you, walking through the bush. But it's how the wallabies traverse the earth, because they walk like human beings, and you get used to it. Man. What you don't get used to is all the poisonous snakes just abound. They can all kill you in 5 minutes or less. Like the spiders that make anything in the U.S. look like a joke. Like just monstrous spiders that actually bite, not like harmful, like big, monstrous, kill you, eat your face off spiders. And like you're running from the spider, you can trip over a snake and it kills you. My mother-in-law was thinking about selling her house. She had some people come to look at the house, and they were like, well, do you have snakes? And she was like, oh, the odd carpet snake. Nothing like bad, nothing poisonous. And then her 5-year-old son goes, weren't those death adders that ate all our chooks? And she was like, it's like death adders on the property, killing their chickens. And it was like, weren't those death adders? She was like, shh. Because they're everywhere. I mean, even the name death adder, right? Adder itself strikes fear in you, and then death adder is like 10 times worse, right? It's like a crazy shark. It's like violent shark, it's like freaks you out twice. Violent criminal shark. Like, ah! So, so that sounded like a human. It was probably an animal. It sounded a heck of a lot like a human. It was a little too... Narayan will go out there and kill whatever's moving out there. Right, it's like he's like in his fatigue. He's out there right there with a sniper rifle. Comes back with like a raccoon scalp. Like he's like been waiting for this. Just like the drug sniffing dogs, they have to plant drugs, otherwise they get depressed because no one smuggles drugs through airports anymore. So in Narayan, we have to plant dangerous animals in the property every so often, so he doesn't get depressed. His ability to take care of everybody. So here was the really cool thing I did that all you guys missed. I can now mix those two arguments together. And I can say, it's funny, but once we accept that there's a God, and we look at human beings, we see that we have the ability to think more deeply and profoundly about the nature of our existence compared to any other creatures. Every other creature operates on instinct, but we have the ability to say stop, to say pause, and take a beat, and think about our existential reality, and think about deep things like the nature of reality and God and the existence of God and loving God. And all-good and all-powerful God would create a world with the possibility of knowing Him. Human beings are the only animals, the only species that has the ability to love God. Therefore, it makes sense that we would evolve up to being human beings, reincarnate up to being human beings, and then from that point of view, we can think about the nature of God. We would therefore be the most God-like because we're able to love God. You can only love what you're like. Therefore, we must have been made divine-like enough to understand God. Therefore, God's not made in our image, we're made in His image, and we are divine-like because we're the only species imbued with the ability to understand God. You can't love something that you're not related to. You can't love something intimately that you're not related to closely, just like you can't have intimate love for a dog or a cat because they have the intelligence of a 2-year-old. And they're your slaves that depend on you for food in a totally hegemonic, slave-like relationship. How could there be love? Love is based on freedom and free choice. They don't have the ability to choose. The only person you can really love, where it's choice, is another human being. Let me finish the argument, then you can object. That's why you're here. You're here to object. Now, God created beings that could choose to love Him, but those beings would have to be divine-like enough to have the freedom to choose to love Him. Therefore, they would be divine-like. Now, when you look at human beings and you find out that being good makes us happy, and therefore the law of karma is itself proven because you're miserable if you don't behave in consonance with higher principles like the Scouts Code. We are more divine-like, therefore that Scouts Code would also be God's code, therefore God would be all good. Springboarding off of us being divine-like and looking at us to get evidence of what our Father is like, just like you look at a child and understand something about what their parent looks like. You look at us, the only species that's able to love God, and you look at the qualities that we have that make us close enough to God that we can love Him intimately, and therefore we're divine-like, and therefore Krishna must have a human-like form. Because we have a divine-like form because we're capable of intimate love. And if God was a wallaby, we wouldn't be able to intimately love Him. And although God may incarnate amongst every species, He most fully incarnates amongst the human species because they have the most full ability to understand Him. And therefore, when you look at human society and what makes it thrive, things like collectivism and caring for others and things like this, then we find that those things must be the qualities of the deity that made us so much like Him. And therefore, the selfish, instinctual animals, they're just looking out for themselves, they're less like God than we are. But even there, you see a little bit coming through, because a little bit of that divine nature still comes through even in plants, even in animals, but it comes through most fully in human beings. Therefore, by studying human society and what makes human society thrive, not the law of the jungle, working on social contract theory. Social contract theory is there's an innate law of the jungle, might equals right, but when we make a society, we decide that, hey, you have the right to own property, so might no longer equals right. You have a right to a jury of your peers. You have a right to due process. We come up with these divine rights. And then we superimpose those on the world of animals. And that's social contract theory. You're born here. You don't ask for roads you can drive on or hospitals you can go to, but they're given to you. But then what also is given to you is a responsibility, perhaps serve in the military, pay taxes, follow the rules of the road, get a driver's license, etc. And social contract theory is the recognition that civilization means you give up some of your right of might equals right to have secured rights, but then what comes along with those secured rights is some responsibility. And now we're moving more towards a divine right where all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, things that aren't in the animal world. But those are in the human world, but because we're divine-like, those are more indicative of God's nature than the animals who don't have the ability to understand Him. Therefore, they're indicative of other aspects of God's nature, but we're indicative of the highest aspects of God's nature, and therefore God is all good, because when you look at human beings, that's what makes us thrive. And therefore, extrapolating on the argument that karma rewards being a good person, then when you look at God as being most like human society, then God would also be a good person. Did you follow that argument? And so that takes this argument and this one and merges them together. Did you follow that, Ishwar? That's a good argument. You ever heard it before? Me neither. I just came up with it. Okay. Yes, son. Your doubt.
I like your first two arguments. The third argument.
The third argument is only a secondary argument that's built on the back of the first two arguments. If, and this is, I'm now making my position known so we can have a proper debate. I'm saying if you like my first two arguments, you've just defeated yourself, because the third argument is merely an extrapolation and a natural conclusion of thinking deeply about the first two arguments. The third argument is nothing more than deep thought about the first two arguments. Therefore, it's not possible to intellectually, in an astute way, like the first two arguments and accept them and not ultimately accept the third argument. You've made a fault of poor reasoning, or perhaps I poorly explained it. But my argument now, what I'm saying is that the third argument is simply adding one and two together from a different angle, but it's nothing other than what's established in the first two arguments. Back to you.
I had an issue with your argument when you said that you can't love an animal
as intimately as you love a human being.
And I think there's a flaw in that argument, because I think loving an animal teaches selfless love, which I think is a big part of understanding God's love. So actually,
Let me respond. I got you. Let me respond. Ultimately, love creates vulnerability. Selflessness is an important aspect of love. It's a critical feature of love. However, it's not the only critical feature of love. Another critical feature of love is vulnerability. And vulnerability means allowing the other person to affect you. But if you allow an instinctual animal that looks at you as a slave owner who gives them food and lacks the ability to think like more than a 15-month-old or a 2-year-old, then that's not real. There's no vulnerability there. So you are correct that selflessness is an important thing and it needs to be taught. But selflessness by itself is not beautiful, just like power by itself is not beautiful. Power and love is a beautiful combination. But if you just look at power by itself, it becomes totalitarian. The world becomes deterministic. Everything that happens is God's responsibility. But that power given away to give us free will becomes a beautiful thing. Similarly, love without vulnerability isn't really love, it's pity. Love with vulnerability becomes intimate.
So why couldn't we say that God pities us and doesn't love us?
We could say that. But God created us divine-like enough, and He forgets His own divinity so that intimate love can exist. That's why Krishna doesn't know He's God. That's why Krishna forgets He's God and plays like a boy. Because a real ultimate deity would be able to love intimately. Krishna can't love us intimately because we are less than an animal to Him. We're less than an ant to Him, comparatively speaking. So He makes us divine-like enough, and then He forgets His own divinity. And that allows for Him to support Himself with us on equal terms and even become our child. And even become our lover. And now intimate love can exist between the soul and God, and that's the purpose of life. And by valuing intimate love, now we have to understand that human beings have something special about them and it makes them divine-like, and therefore what is good for human society versus, let's say, what's good for ant society now becomes more indicative of God's ultimate nature, and therefore I don't have to say, well, if human society thrives because of goodness, well, ant society thrives because of exploitation, therefore how can you say this one is better than this one? I make the argument that we're more divine-like, and therefore this one is more indicative of the nature of the deity. Did you follow that? Boom. You see that? You got to say the debate, hear your opponent, and not just argue with them. I took your argument, fully accepted it, and just showed the limitation of it. Added to it. I could have gone, no, it's not like that, and then we would have just done this. Because arguing that selflessness is taught better by caring for someone that can't do anything for you, you can't get around that one. It's actually a great argument. So if I went like this and just tried to fight you on that, we would have gotten the loggerheads, and nobody would have won. But I took your argument, accepted it, and then showed how it was incomplete. Did you see how persuasive that was? You saw that, right? So the first two arguments prove the third one. The third one is quite esoteric. It's quite, it's you're like you're deep into theology at that point. You're deep into theology. I wouldn't use that argument with a straight karma. I might not even use the God argument. I might just use the karma argument and call it a day. Take the win. Take the small win. Get a couple ticks on your day trading and you're like, all right, I'm out. But I wanted to give you a full picture of what karma looks like. Last point. This was the purpose of class. That was all just an intro I thought of once I sat down. I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I looked up a verse I loved, and then I started speaking, and I thought, I want to give you guys this so you can better appreciate this one. Here's the thing. Stuff happens in life. You can't control it. Some of it's your karma. Also, an interesting feature of karma no one wants to admit is karma is directly linked to the choices you make in this world. If you jump off a building, you just create a new karma for yourself. Some of your karma might be from other lifetimes, stuff you have to go through, but you can also create new karma for yourself. And so a real full understanding of karma values the choices you make in this world today and mixes that together with stuff you've got left over from last time around. And you can understand the principle and learn from it without understanding all the details. And how could you understand all the details? Because there's unlimited quantifiables, because you're an eternal being and you've been getting karma forever. Therefore, there'd be no way for you, unless you were omniscient yourself, to be able to fully understand all the nuances of it. But understand the principle is enough to actually make advancement in life. And therefore, God's not at fault for creating a system that's too complex for us to understand in detail, because we can understand the principle, and that's enough for us to move forward with it. And so now a full understanding of karma values choice in this world. Like you can make choices and I can make choices. And just when you make a choice, it actually affects me. If I have a relationship with you and you make a choice, I'm now linked to you and your choices become mine. So I got to be careful who you link up with, who you pick for your tribe, because you're linked. Bhishma and Drona had a rough go. They linked up with the wrong horse, Duryodhana. You follow? Karna linked up, fought his own brothers. Because he was loyal. I'm a firm believer in loyalty. I look for people who understand loyalty as being a fundamental feature of integrity. Trustworthy, loyal. It's number 2, right? How crazy is that? I need to be trustworthy, and then I need to be loyal back. Crazy, right? You could be trustworthy and not be loyal to somebody. You could say, I'm not going to be loyal to you. I'm loyal to them. But trustworthy and loyal, what a powerful combination. They come out the gate with those two. The Scout's code of honor comes out the gate with those two. I'm a big believer in loyalty. And so once you link up with people and they're part of your tribe, you sink and swim with them. And they affect you. And in many ways, they add to your karma. They are a result of your karma, and they also add to your karma because they also have free will. Get it? If you have free will and you're adding to your karma, then everybody else you're with also has free will and they're adding to your karma. And if they can make free choices, then it means your karma is adjusted by the people you're linked up with. And so there's some freedom and there's some karma. There's some determination and there's some indeterminate realities. Did you guys follow that? That was a heavy point too. That's worthy of reflecting on. And here's the thing. you now may be linked up. You're a variable, they're a variable, and that variable times a variable, plus all the stuff that was left over from before. It's like, man, it's enough to break your head open. But there's one thing. You can learn from every experience. You can master the art of the pivot. You can master the art of the rebound. You can master the art of you can master the art of learning from every experience you undergo in life. So no matter what happens to you, what goes down, you just get better. You learn your lessons. You go to a deep enough place, you're brave enough, you're strong enough, you can feel big emotions like remorse, you can feel big emotions like regret, you can feel big emotions like guilt and shame when you make mistakes. You can let those big, dangerous emotions not crush you, not break you, but make you better. And you can learn the lesson and sail on and just become a better and better version of yourself. You follow this? And part of learning those lessons is you make amends. Sometimes you think, I'll just let it go. We don't have to make amends. It's cool, no problem. But the thing is, the act of making amends is the act of fully feeling the remorse and letting it make you a better person. The curative effect of feeling remorse and regret is that you go and make amends to the best of your ability. Therefore, the idea that you could sail on without making amends means you didn't actually grow from the experience. You're a cheater. And so we have to be willing to go to these deep, dark places, make amends. But what that does is it empowers us. No matter what life throws us, we can grow from the experience. And here's the verse I want to quote. Yomam pashyati sarvatra. One who remembers me everywhere. Yomam. One who, me, pashyati, sees me. Sarvatra, everywhere. One who sees me everywhere. This is Krishna speaking. Sarvam cha mayi pashyati. Sarvam cha mayi pashyati. And he sees, pashyati, same word. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra. He sees me everywhere. And sarvam cha mayi pashyati. He sees everything in me. He sees me in everything. He sees everything in me. You follow this one? He's always remembering me and looking for me everywhere. And he also sees everything that happens in relationship to me. He sees me everywhere in relationship to the world. And he sees everything that happens in the world in relationship to me. Do you guys follow this? So now everywhere I'm looking, I'm seeing Krishna as a factor. Actually, my whole life was a loving conversation between Krishna and me. And everybody else is just facilitating that conversation. And then I'm seeing all these people in the world as being part of that. You follow? So it's really Krishna and me. I'm looking for Krishna. I'm not getting caught up on the external. And actually the externals I'm seeing in relationship to Krishna, and these are two different ways of saying the same thing. I see God everywhere, and I see everywhere within God. You get it? I pierce through the external and see what's really going on, and I look at these things and I see how Krishna is part of all of it. Those are actually the same thing. But it's very beautiful when it's stated like this. It really is a comprehensive worldview. Tasyaham na pranashyami. I am not lost to him. Sachame na pranashyati, and he is not lost to me. I am not lost to him, and he is not lost to me. Nothing can happen in the world that can take Krishna away from you. Everything that happens can bring you closer to Krishna. Everything that happens can remind you of Krishna. Because Krishna is actually everywhere. Never forsook you. Always stayed with you. He's always there. He's always ready to help. Everyone has a future. Everyone has a shot. Everyone has hope. Every reason to be hopeful. No reason not to be hopeful. It's never taken away. Ever. Because an all-good God would never take that away from you. Therefore, hell could not exist with an all-good God. An all-powerful God could create a world like that. And that's the world we live in. Where Krishna is with you, even now, always has been, always will be. And so along with accepting the law of karma and learning to take your lumps, we also have to master the science and art of seeing Krishna everywhere. And seeing everything in relationship to Krishna. And then he'll never be lost to us, we'll never be lost to him, and this whole world becomes it becomes extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily meaningful. It becomes wonderful, inspirational, a blessing. And even bad stuff, you just get better. Devotees have this amazing ability to learn from everything life throws at them, because actually we have full freedom in this regard. Karma doesn't touch us. We can learn unlimitedly from whatever life throws us. Therefore, karma can't actually touch us. We were never touched by karma because we never lost that ability to learn from every experience and to become a better version of ourselves no matter what life puts us through. Therefore, karma doesn't exist. And we have full freedom at every moment, always have, always will. And things like karma experienced by the deluded soul within this material world help get you to the point where you realize that you were never touched by karma. You never will be touched by karma. You always had freedom. Krishna was always right there, always reaching out to you, always just right there, ready for you, waiting for you. Do you guys follow that? That came together nicely. See, because of what we did, the verse sank. The verse hit. Because of the work we did with karma, the verse hit. And that's why these ideas have to be well established, because then theology and these deep ideas of Krishna consciousness make really good sense. What do you want to say?
Regarding free will, if all souls are created equal, meaning not one is better
Yes.
than the other, but all souls are inherently
Yes.
created, how is it that we're able to make different decisions that lead us to different places? Like, how can you get Hitler and Mother Teresa? How do, if you're every soul's inherently just as equally good?
I understand your question.
How can you get
Everything isn't inherently just as good. All souls are inherently valuable and divine. But you have free will. Your free will then leads to different sets of circumstances. The thing is, your misuse of free will doesn't actually taint yourself. Let's take a look at water. Water, in a toilet, goes through a recycle plant. And in a recycle plant, the water is distilled. Distilled means it's boiled and it becomes steam. When water becomes steam, all the microscopic sediment in the water, in the form of stool or whatever else is in water, that stuff can't become steam. When water becomes steam, it rises up, and then they collect it, and it drips down. And that water is called distilled water. It has no heavy metals, no solids in it. It's completely pure water. You can take water and you can mix it with stool. You can mix it with anything, with cyanide, anything. I mean, there's something you mix it with where those things also turn into a gas. That's a problem. So we have to make sure that we're not talking about that. But any kind of sediment, any kind of solid matter, stool, I don't know, uranium, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. But then if you distill it, then it becomes steam, and the matter stays on the ground, and the water rises up, and it's pure. So the water was never actually dirty on a molecular level. On a molecular level, its fundamental level, as H2O, one part, there's 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. H2 means 2 parts hydrogen, O is 1 part oxygen. H2O is the elemental term for water. You know this? You want some H2O? What that literally means is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. That's the bond of molecules. Separate 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen. Those bond together. Usually it's multiple atoms together make a molecule, right? And so multiple atoms together usually make a molecule. Therefore, atoms are submolecular. Then you have subatomic particles, that's protons, neutrons, and electrons. Then you have subatomic particles, that's neutrinos and bosons. Those are the smallest pieces of matter we've been able to find. So when you take a look at, on a molecular level, at water, it's never contaminated. At the same time, you experience a toilet with water and stool in it that you would never drink in a million years. But as soon as you boil it, that water becomes distilled, it becomes steam, and that's actually what happens with the water cycles. Clouds, they distill the water. And there's like the water in the ocean becomes desalinated. The salt stays in the ocean, the water goes up, goes over, rains down, and then we can drink that water. It snows and down and goes to the rivers and goes back to the ocean again, and then gets desalinated all over again. And so what I'm trying to communicate, what our tradition communicates, is that the soul is never contaminated on a molecular level. All souls are pure. They've always been pure. They'll always be pure. We experience in a dreamlike state, a matrix-like state, a delusional state. We experience our bondage in this world and go up and become Mother Teresa and go down, although she wasn't that great after all, and go down and become Hitler. And so she was like a fanatic Christian who would, did all these deathbed conversions of Hindus into Christians. And, so like, why do we think that's so great? Like, y'all only feed you if you become a Christian? Not so keen. And so, I can't do the whole different vision of the world, and so, you go up and become a Mother Teresa, you go down and become a Hitler. Yeah, that's due to poor choices. And those people get karma. But even Hitler never gets contaminated on a molecular level. He's still a pure soul. As are plants, as are animals, as are all manner of beings. And they'll always have the ability to evolve up to a human form of life, and then to choose to love God, and then that whole delusion melts away, and you have full freedom because the karma can't touch you in the sense that you can become a pure soul. You may still suffer your karma for the rest of your lifetime, but it won't actually affect you. You can lose your legs and love Krishna. You can lose your mind and still love Krishna, because your connection to Krishna is a spiritual one, and even your mind can't stop it. So when I make the point that we have full freedom, I don't mean we have full freedom that our body will transform and all of a sudden we'll be 6'4". I don't mean like, or you won't have cancer. I don't mean like that. I mean that you can get to a place where you can grow from every experience, and nothing that's happening to you can actually stop that growth. You have unlimited freedom to turn towards divinity and learn and grow, and that can never be taken from you. Do you get the point I'm making now? It was a good doubt. It was a good doubt. All right, that's it. We're done. Let's do a little kirtan. Thank you very much.